Chapter 2 of The World Set Free by H.G. Wells. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Adam Marsatich. June 2009, Alexandria, Virginia. The World Set Free by H.G. Wells. Chapter the Second. The Last War. Section 1. Viewed from the standpoint of a sane and ambitious social order, it is difficult to understand, and it would be tedious to follow, the motives that plunged mankind into the war that fills the histories of the middle decades of the 20th century. It must always be remembered that the political structure of the world at the time was everywhere extraordinarily behind the collective intelligence. That is the central fact of that history. For 200 years there had been no great changes in political or legal methods and pretensions. The utmost change had been a certain shifting of boundaries and slight readjustment of procedure, while in nearly every other aspect of life there had been fundamental revolutions, gigantic releases, and an enormous enlargement of scope and outlook. The absurdities of courts and the indignities of representative parliamentary government, coupled with the opening of vast fields of opportunity in other directions, had withdrawn the best intelligences more and more from public affairs. The ostensible governments of the world in the 20th century were following in the wake of the ostensible religions. They were ceasing to command the services of any but second-rate men. After the middle of the 18th century, there are no more great ecclesiastics upon the world's memory. After the opening of the 20th, no more statesmen. Everywhere one finds an energetic, ambitious, short-sighted, commonplace types in the seats of authority, blind to the new possibilities and litigiously reliant upon the traditions of the past. Perhaps the most dangerous of those outworn traditions were the boundaries of the various sovereign states, and the conception of a general predominance in human affairs on the part of some one particular state. The memory of the empires of Rome and Alexander squatted, an unlaid carnivorous ghost, in the human imagination. It bored into the human brain like some grisly parasite, and filled it with disordered thoughts and violent impulses. For more than a century, the French system exhausted its vitality in belligerent convulsions, and then the infection passed to the German-speaking peoples, who were the heart and center of Europe, and from them onward to the Slavs. Later ages were to store and neglect the vast insane literature of this obsession, the intricate treaties, the secret agreements, the infinite knowingness of the political writer, the cunning refusals to accept plain facts, the strategic devices, the tactical maneuvers, the records of mobilizations and counter-mobilizations. It ceased to be credible almost as soon as it ceased to happen. But in the very dawn of a new age, their state craftsmen sat with their historical candles burning, and, in spite of strange new reflections and unfamiliar lights and shadows, still wrangling and planning to rearrange the maps of Europe and the world. It was to become a matter for subtle inquiry how far the millions of men and women outside the world of these specialists sympathized and agreed with their portentous activities. One school of psychologists inclined to minimize this participation, but the balance of evidence goes to show that there were massive responses to these suggestions of the belligerent schemer. Primitive man had been a fiercely combative animal. Innumerable generations had passed their lives in tribal warfare, and the weight of tradition, the example of history, the ideals of loyalty and devotion fell in easily enough with the incitements of the international mischief maker. The political ideas of the common man were picked up haphazard. There was practically nothing in such education as he was given that was ever intended to fit him for citizenship as such. That conception only appeared, indeed, with the development of modern state ideas, and it was therefore a comparatively easy matter to fill his vacant mind with the sounds and fury of exasperated suspicion and national aggression. For example, Barnay describes the London crowd as noisily patriotic when presently his battalion came up from the depot to London, to entrain for the French frontier. He tells of children and women and lads and old men cheering and shouting, of the streets and roads hung with the flags of the Allied powers, of a real enthusiasm even among the destitute and unemployed. The labor bureaus were now partially transformed into enrollment offices, and were centers of hotly patriotic excitement. At every convenient place upon the line, on either side of the Channel Tunnel, there were enthusiastic spectators, and the feeling in the regiment, if a little stiffened and darkened by grim anticipations, was none the less warlike. But all this emotion was the fickle emotion of minds without established ideas. It was with most of them, Barnay says, as it was with himself, a natural response to collective movement, and to martial sounds and colors, and the exhilarating challenge of vague dangers. And people had been so long oppressed by the threat and preparation for war that its arrival came with an effect of positive relief. Section 2. The plan of campaign of the Allies assigned the defense of the lower Meuse to the English, and the troop trains were run direct from the various British depots to the points in the Ardennes where they were intended to entrench themselves. Most of the documents bearing upon the campaign were destroyed during the war, from the first scheme of the Allies seems to have been confused, but it is highly probable that the formation of an aerial park in this region, from which attacks could be made upon the vast industrial plant of the lower Rhine, and a flanking raid through Holland upon the German naval establishments at the mouth of the Elbe, were integral parts of the original project. Nothing of this was known to such pawns in the game as Barnay and his company, whose business it was to do what they were told by the mysterious intelligences at the direction of things in Paris, to which the city the Whitehall staff had also been transferred. From first to last, these directing intelligences remained mysterious to the body of the army, veiled under the name of orders. There was no Napoleon, no Caesar to embody enthusiasm. Barnay says, "We talked of them. They are sending us to Luxembourg. They are going to turn the Central European right." Behind the veil of this vagueness the little group of more or less worthy men which constituted headquarters was beginning to realize the enormity of the thing it was supposed to control. In the great hall of the War Control, whose windows looked out across the Seine to the Trocadero and the palaces of the Western Quarter, a series of big-scale relief maps were laid out upon tables to display the whole seat of war, and the staff officers of the control were continually busy shifting the little blocks which represented the contending troops, as the reports and intelligence came drifting in to the various telegraphic bureaus in the adjacent rooms. In other smaller apartments there were maps of a less detailed sort, upon which, for example, the reports of the British Admiralty and of the Slav commanders were recorded as they kept coming to hand. Upon these maps, as upon chessboards, Marshal Dubois, in consultation with General Virard and the Earl of Delhi, was to play the great game for world supremacy against the Central European powers. Very probably he had a definite idea of his game. Very probably he had a coherent and admirable plan. But he had reckoned without a proper estimate either of the new strategy of aviation or of the possibilities of atomic energy that Holsten had opened for mankind. While he planned entrenchments and invasions and a frontier war, the Central European generalship was striking at the eyes and the brain.